we are going to talk about some super exciting stuff. So I hope you are buckled in and just have been waiting all of your life for the discussion today. Ben, what's our conversation topic today?
How to make $10 million in 3 days.
You're such a liar. What's the topic of today?
HR standards.
HR standards, because we thought to ourselves, what's a good content driver where we could be like, hey, this would be a needle mover. Let's talk about HR standards. And Ben talked about it yesterday. I'm like, yeah, we could do that. That sounds like a good one.
Ben was excited.
But I will say it did come up on our L10 today, Tosh. Like we did talk about some stuff today. So
I know. I'm like, did you guys plan this?
No, but it sounds pretty timely. It made it sound like we really know what we're talking about. Like we really are dialed in.
If you ask me, I'm like, wow.
We're catering everything to Tasha and Human Being Reno. All righty, Ben Clatterbuck, I'm going to let you take it away and drive this crazy train going down the rails of a crazy
train. Yeah, I mean, HR is, nobody likes HR, let's be honest. The only people who like HR are in HR. Like that's really, like yeah, exactly. I mean, I ran, at Roasters, I was half ops, half HR. That's the only reason why I liked it, because I was in it too. But I mean, from the outside looking in, it's like the department that nobody ever really wants.
There's no way you can make it look sexy, right? No, there's no way you can make it look sexy.
You can't, because you're either, most of the time what you're doing in the HR department is telling people no. And when you do tell them yes, they've been waiting for that yes for like 6 months. So they already don't like you, or you're like chasing down harassment claims. It's never fun. But it's necessary. It's super essential. Honestly, if you're a company you've got more than one location, 2 locations, like even if it's you as an owner operator, like you do need to have some sort of HR folder. Yes. Because there are quite a few rules and regulations you have to follow out there, especially if you're going to be employing people. And especially these days, even just over the last 4 to 5 years, there's so much more that's been added on. COVID, there's so many policies, regulations, state and federal regulations, we were like just trying to keep up with. Okay, now we're doing this, now we're offering that, now we're tracking this, now we have to offer these days off, and if you don't have a dedicated lawyer, either section of your brain or like a dedicated person, you can get yourself into a lot of hot water, especially when you're talking about state and federal stuff. They love to give out fines. It's a great money maker for most state and federal organizations. So it's important to always be cognizant of. I would say it's important after you get past like the 2-shop mark, it's important to probably have somebody either on your team or who's an outsourced HR person who's sort of tracking these things for you. So fun topic. If you are sort of masochistic, it's fun.
I said today, and so in my little reel I did promoting today's call, I'm just talking about, hey, listen, HR is not a pain point until HR is a pain point, and then you wish to God that you had something in place. So I think like establishing go-tos and like a go-to rule of thumb on this is where we go to, and even if that's just which websites to go to, or which person to ask on which websites to go to, or just having a piece of reference you can go back to. I think it saves your bacon from when you do get in the oven and then you're like, oh man, I wish we had thought about this before we were in the oven.
Yep. Yeah, it's just like in ops experts, in the online world, it's not so much HR that's their ugly baby, but like their disputes and failed transactions. Like every business industry has this little like dark corner, like just don't look at it. Nobody wants to look at it until you're like, oh no, why haven't we been looking at that for the last 8 months?
Yeah.
So it's always good to keep an eye on and keep fresh, especially what's going on in your state. That's important too. So importance of HR. Why do we want HR standards? Why are they important to have in our company? A few points. HR is really easy when you have 1 to 2 shops. When you have, yourself and a total of 12 employees, everybody by name, you've taken them all out for drinks at some point, where they were born, like everything about them. Super easy because everything's in your brain. Once you start going past 2 shops, then you have to start thinking, okay, what was their last name? Like, when did I hire them? When was the last time I gave them a raise? How much am I even paying them? Like, these things compound really quick once you get past like 12 employees. Then, you get up to like 60 employees, you're like, I've never even seen that kid before. So like, I don't even know if they work at my location or not. So having some sort of standards of record keeping is super important once you get past those initial numbers. What happens when you have high growth or when you have high turnover? Like, how are you keeping track of who these people are? How are you keeping track of the fact that they're 18? I mean, are they minors and working at your business? Are you keeping track of this? I mean, there's some regulations around that. How are you tracking paid sick leave, vacation time, wage increases, promotions? Like these all compound, and that's sort of like that dark corner, like nobody wants to look at it until they're 9 chops deep and they're like, oh my God, it's a mess in there, because they weren't looking at it from the beginning. If you start early on with good HR standards, it doesn't turn into like a spiraling mess by the time you actually get to it. So important to track those. Where do you keep their contact info? Most states and federally, you have to hold contact records of all your employees for federally, I believe it's minimum 6 years. So where is this all being kept? Your state may be different, but you have to keep records of all these employees. Where is that being kept? And all this has to do with having a standard of, okay, how am I going to keep my records? How am I going to keep my records up to date? What are the records I need to keep? And these are all those sort of HR standards that you do need to keep in your brain as an employer if you're going to have employees in a brick and mortar business. So that's the overarching importance of HR standards. It's a beautiful, lovely thing. I know everybody loves it. You could also just go 1099s with everybody and say, screw it all, I don't need to keep track of anything.
I'm not sure that goes so well. We could try.
Yeah, you could try, but yeah, we'll see. So a lot of what would encompass answers to those important questions or important points we just went through is having some sort of database, some sort of standardized foldering system, record keeping system that keeps all of your people basically on paper and in one place. And you can do that a couple of ways, and we'll go over a couple of them. We'll start with like a free-ish version, well, a free version, and then what that looks like and to go into a paid version. So I'm going to share my screen, if Sir Aaron would so allow me to do that.
Oh, well, see, if you hadn't talked so much trash, then I might think about it. Try now.
Hey.
There you go.
All righty. So Tasha, you might recognize this. I know Drew's rolled this out with you guys at HB Reno. This is what we call, yeah, okay, cool. This is what we call an HRIS, or an HR or Human Resources Information System. Basically, this is my people on paper, my employees on paper, everything about them, everything I need to know about them, everything that the government may ask from me about them. I want it all in one place. If you're a smaller company, that 1 to 9 shop range, you probably have an office somewhere that's got a file cabinet full of papers of W-9 forms, I-9 forms, direct deposit forms, all that stuff, which works. It's great. It's fine. Until you start growing past that and you start running out of space to keep all these manual pieces of paper. If you use those file cabinets in tandem with something like this, this is what we call the free version. This is basically a tool that lets you track all of the people that you hire, where they're at in your company in terms of their location, where they're in your company in terms of their position, in terms of the length of their tenure, how long they've been working for you, how much you're paying them. This is a rendition of what we used at my previous company, when we also included their incentives. I don't know if you guys remember the incentive matrix that we talked about a lot. A lot of that was based off of their tenure too, and their position. So we calculate a percentage of that incentive matrix that they would get. If you haven't watched that video, feel free to go back into the membership area and just click through the Finances 2.0 section, I believe is where it's at.
Look at that shameless plug. Go back and check it out. I love it. We do commercials for ourselves inside our shows.
But the great thing about this is it's essentially a dashboard. If I am an HR manager and I've got quarterly raises coming up, I can come in here quickly and look at each location and say, okay, here's where all of my people are at with their wages. And it all builds sort of off of this list view. So this is just a dashboard table view. And this list view, I can go in and add my employees. And, as they're added through, I can add Drew, who's a brand new hire. He's going to our location number 3. He's a new barista. We hired him today, was the 19th. Been here for 0 years and 0 months, and it'll place him into that location. Where's Mr. Drew movie? There he is as a barista. So I can easily keep track of, how many employees I have at each location. If a location is short on employees or is it needing new hires, it's just a great spot to have quick information that you won't know you need until you're like, oh shoot, I need how many people are in shop number 3? Oh, that's right, I can just pull this up. Okay, there's 12 employees, easy. 12 t-shirts for that shop, whatever it may be. So you always want some sort of snapshot view for all your records. This list view is where all the details are going to live. And then at our previous company, we also use a tab called updates. As we would onboard new employees, it would be the job of the onboarder to add in who that employee was, when they were hired, where they're going, if any sort of comment. As we offboarded employees, so whether they fired or they quit, we would then remove them also. And the thing about these systems, and I guess one of the main points about these free systems is it is very manual. And it's very detail oriented. That's probably also why people don't like HR so much, because you're talking like you're down in the details of everybody in your business. So it does take, a detailed eye to keep track of this. I'm also here tracking updates to employee wages. The last thing you want to do is, give an employee a raise, say give them $1 raise, and 6 months rolls by or a year rolls by, it's time for another raise, and you never recorded that. So you're like, well, I guess we'll just give them a $2 raise this time, because you have no idea what you're giving to people as wages and raises. And here we also added shop transfers. We were a larger company with a lot of locations, and we had a lot of baristas who liked to move to another location because it was closer to their school or closer to their house or whatever it may be. So being able to track where even your employees are at, if you have an employee who files or has a complaint against another employee, what shop did that happen in? Who is that employee's manager even? Who do you go to try and track down any sort of HR related issue? It's good to know where that employee is sitting from the day to day. So it's a good, important section to have too. Then of course, who are we promoting and who are we demoting? Again, if you're going to promote someone to manager, you're gonna have to give them a wage increase at some point. If you're not tracking who that person is, then that employee, 5 months down the road, hey, I never got that raise. And you're like, oh yeah, let me back pay you for the last 4 months of when you were supposed to be a manager. It happens a lot. And then your owner goes, why the hell we paying out this much for this employee's payroll check? You're like, I'm sorry. And it's a whole thing. So it's all about making sure that you don't create any forest fires, or you're putting out forest fires before they even happen, before you have issues. Good record keeping and tracking of who your employees are, where they are, what they should be getting is going to, again, help you in the long run, because the last thing you want to do is go and clean up a mess. Another tab along the bottom here is just a really easy paid sick leave and time off. In Washington State, and this varies state by state, Washington State employers are required to give employees paid sick leave, paid for every 40 hours, and it might have changed since then actually. For every 40 hours an employee works in your company, they get X amount of paid sick leave that's held in a bank for them, that has to be presented on their pay stub to them. And if an employee wants to use that paid sick leave, then you have to be able to communicate that to whoever is running your books, whether it's a bookkeeper, a CPA, and you need to communicate, okay, this employee is using X amount of paid sick leave. I need to remove that amount of paid sick leave from their bank now and apply that to their check. If you don't have any way of tracking that, especially if you have, a lot of 18-year-olds who like to take a lot of sick time off because they got a cough from staying out too late the night before, you have to track that. So this is a really easy way to do it. And you have another section for, for those employees who have paid time off. You need to remove that from their bank and apply it to their checks and make sure that's calculated correctly on the pay stubs. It's an easy way for you to just at least keep track of that and communicate that to your, most likely your bookkeeper, who's actually printing the physical checks that are going out to your people. Going along the bottom here too, again, where we have a non-current employees, any previous employees, great to have. I can't count how many times in my previous line of work where I would get a letter from Washington State Department of Employment Department, you know, for an employee claiming unemployment from us, and they hadn't worked for us for 3 years. And I go, why are they claiming unemployment from us? I haven't even seen them in 3 years. I wouldn't know that unless I was tracking the fact of when they were hired, when they left. And I can write back to the employment department and say, hey, no, they haven't worked for us 3 years. Sorry, you can't ding our unemployment taxes with that. They're not our employee, and they haven't been for a while. Lastly, you have a fun little raise schedule, which we talked about, I think in People 1.0. We talked about it briefly a while ago. This was just a way for us to track our reviews. Our review system was based on every 6 months of reviews. It was possible for you to get a raise. This was a way for us to track how they were doing on those reviews, and then how much of a raise they should get based on what quarter it was, and so forth. This is a bit more custom. This whole sheet's fairly custom, but it is it does have its pros in that it's a lot cheaper than some online platforms. It's got, you know, it's a Google sheet, so you can link even to a lot of the resources that you would keep in actual paper files. You can create hyperlinks for, and it is highly customizable. But like I said, it does take a lot of manual work, and it takes a detailed eye for somebody who, you know, likes doing this. Any questions, thoughts on that before we move on to our next section?
It's helped me be way more organized. Thank you, Drew.
Yeah.
And Ben.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, this document has evolved a lot through the years. You know, I feel like it started very, very simple, you know, and then obviously each iteration, and this is Ben's brainchild. This thing is beautiful, Ben. So well done on that. But I think too, it's nice to, I think always when you're looking for people to mentor you, or you're looking for people to help you grow your business, however that's going to be, to look to somebody who's been doing it just a little bit longer, or somebody that's doing it just a little bit bigger, or, you know, just for the sake of what are the pain points? It's almost like predicting the future, right? Like how can I predict my future pain points? I think that's what this sheet to me is. Maybe you're not going to need all these tabs right out of the gates, or maybe you're not going to, you know, you look at this and you're like, man, this feels robust, you know, but the reason it's robust is because Ben went through a revolving 150 employee door. Like, you know, when you're cycling that many people, that many bodies, that many transitions, and you need to be the epicenter of all that knowledge base. Like that's what grows a sheet like this. So Ben, I think it's a beautiful thing. One question I had, because obviously I haven't seen this iteration, Ben, so I'm as impressed as Tasha right now. For the updates tab, are you migrating people through that, or could an employee end up in that updates tab in a couple of different columns? You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. So I guess I could walk you through the workflow of what this would be. So when we used it, the workflow was, if I'm running onboarding, I'm the first face that a new employee sees. I give them their W-9, their I-9, their new employee sheet. They fill that all out. They come back for orientation, you know, whatever it is next week. I am then, if I'm the onboarder, I'm entering in who this new employee is. And then at some point, you know, after I've gone through that week of orientations, I'm going to then push all of these new employees into my list, and their employees, they're good. These other sections I would leave to my regional managers, who are firing, hiring, promoting, moving, who are really in there with their hands moving employees around. They would come through here and update these, and then like every week we go through and I shift everything if it needs to be shifted. My regionals are basically inputting information here, and as that information is updated in this view, it's removed and cleaned out, and we keep going. Yeah, it's especially, I mean, we were talking about, 150 plus employees. Like every spring we're hiring like an extra 25. Like when you're onboarding, it's just like a massive dump of information into this sheet, and then you're sorting it out so that your table view stays correct and consistent. And then yes, there's also, you know, if I'm employee, you know, if I'm Ben here, and I'm transferring, well, I might also be, I show up in this column, but I might also be transferring because I'm getting a promotion. So I'd also show up here as Ben is now a manager. Ben is now at the Road 68 shop, and Ben is getting a raise. So that way, whoever is importing that information into the list, it knows exactly what information is getting updated. And that is where like the super manual process that comes through. If you want to get to more of that sort of automated process, that's where moving over to a platform might be ideal for you. Honestly, we got to the point where this was like bursting at the seams. Like we were like, if it had gone much farther, another 30 employees, I've been like, look, this is not going to work anymore.
I think too, and I know you're going to show some platforms to us as well, but I think too, you can start once you do get to that place where you decide, hey, so obviously Collab Team, we always advocate for free before you start paying.
Mm-hmm.
Like, let's try and develop something, even if it costs you a little bit more in employee time, all you're given is that employee experience, you know? So like, let them understand the ins and outs before you start making a software solution necessarily, until you start really burning time. And you're like, this is not this person's highest brilliance. I could be elevating this person up.
Yeah.
But I would say too, that some of the platforms are going to offer you multiple things where, you know, a question would be, do you want to still keep doing payroll in-house? Or
Yeah.
do you want to, you know, push that to somebody outside? You know, are there collateral things? Because a lot of the platforms actually have multiple different fingers that once you start entering on one side, it's going to make it very easy to make decisions to continue to engage. That's what makes it sticky, right? That's what makes you get deeper and deeper into the relationship with them. So I think obviously coming at it with both eyes open, a sheet like this in my mind identifies all the pain points, so that when you start vetting different platforms, you know what you're shopping for. You know, otherwise they come out with all their bright shiny objects and they're like, you can do this and you can do this and you can even offer this, and it's like, that sounds really awesome, but are you going to need all that? And you're paying, nobody's giving you something for free, you know what I'm saying? So there's going to be something that's going to cause your prices to rise in what you're paying for the tool. So I think I always would advocate for something like this, where like you understand it and you understand what's being asked of you, so that when you evaluate platforms, you know what you need versus what you don't need.
For sure. And when you're in a free version like this is hitting a lot of the main areas that you're working in through an HR department and tracking your employees. So you will know when you've hit the end of the road when it comes to a file like this. You'll know when you're like, okay, I'm spending 3 hours doing X. I'm spending an hour a day doing this, or whatever it may be. You'll know when you've got to the point of no return with the sheet, where you go, okay, now it is time to upgrade. Like I've gotten everything I've gotten out of this. We've got no more room in our file cabinet in our office. Like you need to go to more of a digital solution. And hopefully by that time, just like you said, you'll know all the pain points where you're like, okay, I wish this was better. I wish that was better. I wish, instead of having to print out 40 W-9s every spring, I could just email a W-9 to somebody, have them email it back to me. Like you'll get to those points. And that's where you upgrade to one of these platforms. So yeah, a couple that I really liked and would have gone forward with are, there's one called Bamboo. It's a pretty popular HR platform. And there's another one called Rippling. These two are, from what I can tell, I would have gone with Bamboo, but they're the most user-friendly. They're the simplest when it comes to being able to input your employee's information. It's actually done a lot by the employee. And they do offer you quite a bit of features, if you will. One of the biggest ones that, there we go. One of the, that's what I'm looking for. One of the biggest ones that was a sort of a gleam in my eye was onboarding. Like I said, when we do every spring or summer, we would go through hiring like mad, or you're opening a new location, you need 15 new employees. These platforms made onboarding really easy in that all you needed basically was a name and an email. and you just sent all of your information that the employee needed to fill out, like the W-9s, the I-9s, their social security numbers, uploading their social security cards, sending you their food service cards. All of that was automated. It would email out to them, they would fill it out, email back to you, and then you are not having to have stacks and stacks and stacks of files with papers filled, because you have to hold these records for 5 to 6 years now. It made everything very automated, very succinct. This would have saved us hours and hours alone just in the onboarding process. So this is a really big point to think about. Also tracking compensation, those other things I talked about. They do really good at tracking the paid time offs, the paid sick leaves, so that instead of you having to make sure that you are tracking this on your own and emailing your bookkeeper about it and maybe losing something in translation between emails, this is all pretty self-contained for you inside the software. Same with this Rippling. These are what you'll find with these platforms is they're pretty much carbon copies of each other. When it comes to these HR platforms, these are what I would call sort of the mid-tier. You can get up to the top tier enterprise stuff, but that's for you're talking about companies of thousands of employees, not hundreds. So these mid-tier ones are pretty much all carbon copies of each other. They do a really good job with tracking your employees and where they're at in your company, onboarding, and also pushing out policy updates. You can send out, if you have updates to your employee handbooks or updates to policies you want to send out for your company, you push that out to all of your employees via email. They have to mark it as read. You get notified that it's been read. They have to create it and that sort of stuff. So once you've gotten past this guy, I would really look at one of these two platforms, because they're really good. But again, not cheap. You're talking about I believe Bamboo's $100 a month, and then it's $8 a head. So if you think of how many employees you have, that can get spendy real quick. 100 employees at $8 an employee. I mean, that's a lot more expensive than Google.
For free.
So and that's where with these two platforms you have to go, okay, how many hours is whoever is my HR manager spending doing this? Okay, I can remove that chunk. I can subtract that from my cost. How many hours is my bookkeeper having to spend, going through this? I can remove that as a cost. So you really have to sort of figure out what works best for you and where you're at, but highly recommend these. Do you know of any other, Aaron, that are good platforms? Have you come across anybody even working with other clients that they flagged?
I think any of the PEOs, Paychecks is an example. They'll all have an HR arm, so they want your business. That's what I was talking about, multiple different fingers. So you can take I know Paychecks, and we've used it for a couple of different clients where they have an HR arm that you could build out your employee handbook through them. And one of the sexiest things I think about what they offer in that is that their attorneys are continually updating the boilerplate stuff in there. So you can say, I've got employees in this state and this state and this state. And a lot of times for our online employers, right? Where it's how do you keep up with HR when you have people in 10 states, So it's these bigger PEOs where they have attorneys that are working the legal in all of those different places that actually graft into your employee handbook. So you can say, okay, state of California, what is it that I'm required of? Okay, state of New Hampshire, what is it that's required? But that's all ingrained in a digital employee handbook that's updating real time. So you still embed your secret sauce, it becomes yours. You still put in all the things that we would normally as we build up employee handbooks for companies, but tacked into that is also the layers of legalities too, of what do I have to do for maternity leave in this state? What do I need to offer when it comes to sick time or paid time off or all these different parameters? Those are all vetted by attorneys. And then in those PEOs, typically they have a lot of the things like what Bamboo's offering there, where, okay, here's an onboarding part of it. And here's all these different pieces where you clip in. Now, every new clip in is a new bump up in price, right? Yeah. So they win you in by saying, we'll take on your payroll processing for you. But did you also know we have an HR arm? And people are like, oh, you'll help me with my handbook? Yeah, I'll help you out, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have all of the different moving pieces. And so each one, oh, did you also know there's a 401k option that's through us because we're a big entity? Do you also know that we provide health insurance as an option? So they bait you into a couple different things, but there are some really great solutions out there. But like Ben was saying, at that point, each bite of the apple you're taking is another bite of the apple at a monthly. And usually all the ones I've seen is a base cost plus per head. You know what I mean? So, and every new benefit you offer is an increase in what they're offering you per head. I will say though, I think it's in Bamboo. There's definitely one out there that I had vetted. It's been some time since I looked at HR platforms, but several of them I thought also added training too, right, Ben? So not only just like onboarding processes, but I know that was something we came up with a lot in Roasters where we're like, it'd be so cool if we could set up modules where we just pushed out to our baristas or our system managers or our managers, depending on what tier they're at, and they had to consume these modules, take a test on the back of that module, have that all be self-graded within the application itself, and just spit out results, because that's our job, right? Our job is to coach people based on what they know or don't know. And if we could like one-to-many crowdsource those kinds of testings and then bring back just our coaching of how they scored and how we can elevate them, I do think there's some pretty cool efficiencies that come out of platforms like that.
Yeah, and even I believe it is Bamboo also, your whole employee satisfaction, but you can also run your entire review structure through them.
Yeah.
So sending out testing to your employees on a regular basis, sending out reviews. Hey, watch this video, take this quiz. Hey, watch this video, report back to me. You can run reviews and then subsequent raises through that. So it kind of knocks this out again. What this is really, I mean, these platforms have taken all of the pain points and said, I'm going to automate it and look pretty for you, charge you $1. But they do a good job of that. Yeah, and reviews is, especially again, if you've got 300 employees across a couple states in different time zones, whatever it may be, that helps that process a lot too. So that's a good standard of record keeping, I would say, for a company. It doesn't even have to be this document, but just the fact that you have somewhere that you can go for instant information of any person. I mean, Johnny at the shop 3 gets hit by a car in the drive-through. What's his last name? What's his phone number? What's his social security number? What's his address? You know, who's his guardian? That type of information is stuff that you need on the spot really quickly. So having it all in one spot is super important. And I would say last thing before moving on from this is the least amount of hands on this, the best, right? So this is your HR manager or your ops manager, and maybe 2 others, because you really don't want people messing with this. And of course, you're going to have sensitive information here. So it's always important, especially when it comes to HR, that information is all super sensitive. So the least amount of eyes and hands in it, the better. That's just general rule of practice for you there.
Drew Moody, do you have any comments on that? I know you've set this up for a couple of clients now. I know also you obviously were one of the regionals that Ben referenced of jockeying names back and forth across this. Any feedback from you or any thoughts from just a practical boots on the ground perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't really graduate into any HR software, at least at my time there. Yeah. So this document is really handy for if I'm states away and suddenly I'm on the spot to get some information. This is a place that I can access really quick and easy. The workflow capability in something like this is really easy and consistent. And filling it up as far as organization goes, it's really congruent with the way that you would think. You know, it's set up logically as well. So as you fill it out, it obviously populates itself. So it really came in handy for us. And of course, Ben was our fail safe. You know, if anything went out of hand, some HR advice or guidance, I'd go to Ben. But this sheet in itself was a valuable tool, because it's like, you know, if you don't want to hold all this information in your head, of course, but when you need on the spot stuff, it's just right there for you.
Ben, how did it go as far as, I know you began to move, and I don't want to steal your thunder, so don't let me take over things that you don't want me to take over. When you began to exit some of the roles of, because I think all of us, right, we believe pretty strongly in EOS's system, Entrepreneur's Operating System, by Gino Wickman from the book Traction. But part of that is delegate and elevate, right? Like, how do we delegate down things that don't have to be you anymore? It doesn't require your specific brilliance necessarily. You've end over end standard operating procedure, SOP'd that thing out. Now we can escalate Ben and make sure, because as the company grows, we want to keep Ben at his highest point of brilliance. Ben's one of the top paid employees. Like, we don't want to just be paying Ben to slog in things that don't require him anymore. So I know some of this stuff you began to hand down to Jordan, right? Because she was a regional that specialized in HR, like we began to designate different things.
Yeah.
How easy was the handoff with an end-over-end system like that? Do you feel like that's why you made this one so, like Drew said, logic-based, so that it was just super user-friendly, so people understood it, you had already grafted them in and using it on a day-to-day. So when it came to you delegating, elevating, handing down to Jordan, escalating into some higher level stuff, so they only reached up to you when it was like the ship's burning down, but otherwise they were pretty much self-contained. Did you find the handoff to Jordan that all that went well?
Yeah, it did go very well. And I mean, obviously with oversight from me for a while, but this started with just, this whole file started with just this first page with, a couple sections on it. Yeah. And as the pain points and fires came up, I was like, oh shit, we should probably add that. Oh, I need that. Oh, okay. I need some way to figure out how much. I think it was probably because we were supposed to give a barista a raise that we told him we never did for 3 months. And I was like, how do I make that not happen again? I want to make sure I keep track of this so I don't piss these baristas off. All right, I'll add a wage change section now. So it's been built as I've gone through the pain points, and that's, I think, sort of what made it logical step-by-step sort of file, because I thought, okay, if I need to do this, now I'm going to need to do that, and then I'm going to need to do that. So that's how it was built. So then handing it off to Jordan, it was super simple because her brain works the same way. Anybody who's doing HR, their brains are probably going to be fairly similar in how they work methodically through things. Yeah. So it worked really well. And then from here, also handing off payroll to her, and that was the ultimate hands off for me. I was like, okay, you now own this HR, basically our database, and you also own, payroll and making sure that these 150 employees are getting their information sent over the bookkeeper. And then from there, I was able to just oversee and check in and, do audits of what she was doing. It was a lot simpler to hand off than, it might have been even simpler to hand off the platform. These platforms are great, but they can be really robust. And so if you're the first person jumping into it, you're talking about maybe 2-3 months of training, you can figure out how it works. That can be difficult. This was fairly simple to hand off, which was nice, I suppose, too.
Good. And we decided not to put this in the resource library, right? Or maybe we should think about putting it in the resource library with like the caveat of, hey, you're going to probably want to buy a project block for this one because it can build out. But I guess if you're interested in this sheet, we can just email in HQ at the Collab Team. And we can hook you up with that.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, some last, we got 15 minutes. Some last points I want to go over when it comes to HR standards, and that is, of course, knowing how you're supposed to operate and what your standards are supposed to be. And that's when the good old state and feds come in. Yay! Hey, state and federal regulations are by no means anybody's favorite topic to talk about, but they are, you have to know about them for your business. They're regulations for a reason. When it comes to state regs, every state is different. Most states are somewhat similar, but very different. Some states don't even have minimum wages. Some do have minimum wages. So what I recommend is going to your state's website. It's usually an employment security department or employment and labor department or employment and something.gov of your state. And most of them will have really good tools like this. This is for Washington State, but it's a small business guide. Essentially, if I'm running a small business in Washington, this actually gives me a lot of really good resources on when I'm opening my business, how I'm paying employees in my business, how I'm running my business. So I highly recommend going to your state's government website and looking for these tools, because they do a good job. Like Washington here, for example, if I'm getting ready to pay my people, what do I need to do to even pay employees? Like, do I need to do it myself, hire a professional? Like, what do I need to pay my employees? What tax responsibilities do I have? What forms do they need to fill out? W-4, I-9, sick leave notification form. That was a fun one that they kind of sprung on us. We were like, what now? So they have to fill out a form for us to be able to let them use their own paid sick leave. all of these are things that you need to know about, and most of these too are those documents that need to be held inside your employee's file for 4 to 6 years, depending on whether it's a state or federal regulation. If you don't check these, you won't know, and then your employment security office comes knocking, once a year, say, hey, what's going on with your business over here? Can we look at your files? And you go, what files? I don't know of such things. I-9 is a fun one, because if the feds show up, I believe it was something like $3,000 in an employee fine for each one that did not have an I-9 on file. So if they show up and you have 0 I-9s for all of your employees, you're talking about a pretty hefty fine. Of course, they might go easy on you, but you're still going to owe them something, and that's just money you're throwing out the window for not paying attention to what you need. So definitely go through your state's government websites, their employment websites, look for these. They're usually an off branch of your state's government site, and look for one of these sites that sort of breaks down all of those regulations for you. Next one is, and same thing, but for the feds. U.S. Department of Labor, that's something everybody's got to know about. And it's where you're going to get most of the regulations that the federal government requires of you. Now with the feds are sort of baseline. The minimum you'll ever have to do is what the feds tell you to do. And then each state's going to impose their own regulations on top of that. So the ultimate be all of everything you have to do comes to your state, but the minimum of like, I guess you could kind of flip that. The federal is the minimum what you have to do. They'll say you need to pay your employees $5. Your state's going to come in and say, no, you need to pay your employee $8. So 8's what you got to go with, basically whatever your state says. If your state doesn't have any regulations, it defaults back to whatever the feds say. Minimum wage being an example. So wages and hours are in here. If any of you ever worked through, were employed or employer during COVID, there was a lot of COVID relief funds, paid federal family and medical leave. That was in there a lot too. Federal Medical Leave Act, requiring employees, 50 or more employees, to give up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave. That's a requirement. You don't get around that. You don't have a way to get around that if you've got more than 50 employees. And if you're like us in Washington State, they came in and said, okay, no, 12 weeks of unpaid isn't enough. You also were going to add 4 weeks of paid, or whatever it may be. So,
right.
So you need to know what the Fed is asking you to do and what your state is asking you on top of that. Again, these aren't fun things to research. I like kind of doing this just because I like getting into the nerdy regulation side of a lot of stuff, but this is where it's good to have an HR person, or if you're going to work with, like Aaron was saying, one of those platforms, they have these people all over and they have them researching each state to tell you, okay, no, you can't do just 12 weeks of unpaid. You need 12 weeks unpaid, and you also need 4 weeks of paid, and you need some way for that employee to document that, and you need some way to keep that document so that if we ask you for it, you don't get fined. And I recommend, if you're a small company with a couple shops, you could do this on your own. Once you get up to like 4 or 5 locations, you really should start looking at either hiring in-house for an HR person, or you can even find third-party HR sources who will be sort of like the broad stroking HR people. They won't dig into your books and give you really custom stuff, but they'll say, okay, here's what we know for Washington State, here's what we know for Nevada, and we'll sort of give you some guidelines to work around, and we'll maybe, process your payroll or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Let's see, that covers it. Those two resources will be your best resources when it comes to your business and your employees. I recommend checking these once every 2 or 3 months, depending on what's going on in the world. When it was in 2019, 2020, I was checking Washington, Employment State Department probably once every week or two, to be honest, because that's how fast, everybody remembers that, how fast updates were changing when it comes to what happens if your employee gets sick, what do you as a provider need to add. So checking these frequently will, again, keep you out of the doghouse when it comes to what your employees need and what's required of you to give to them.